Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Saptarshi Mukherjee, a final year undergraduate in computer science and engineering at IIT Bhilai. So, over here, I'll be sharing some anecdotes and glimpses of my placement journey. I hope they'll be didactic to the target audience, or at least interesting. Thanks for the TNP cell for having me here. So, before I go to the questionnaire, I'm glad enough to share with all of you that I have received a number of offers in this involved season, four of which are most notable to me. The first one, of course, being the PPO. It was from needle.ai, where I pursued internship for 3 months and then received the PPO. After that, it was through the campus placements, a genuinely good offer from Comfort Systems. Then came Expedia, which was an off-campus procedure, and then finally the Codenation Innovation Labs, which was definitely the grandest of the procedures that I have gone through in this entire season. So that's pretty much of the structure, and I'll be making references to all these interview experiences. What was your feeling before the placement session started? Well, we all were quite apprehensive. We had apprehension and anxiety because of the pandemic, which created the setting for all of us. We were beset with a lot of expectations because of the performances of our seniors, but again we did not have any guarantee because of the fluctuations in the news that we heard in all that were occurring in the nation. So definitely combining everything, it was an interesting phase that involved every kind of feeling, but when it was over, it was really a memorable part of the entire year to be recollected, for sure. So yeah, how does it feel now? Well, very relaxing, at least I'd be honest, as that relaxation or relief is the most notable feeling that a student really has after this placement procedure, at least most of them. So we were quite jubilant, quite excited, enthusiastic, and really happy enough to share the news with everybody, but the relaxation definitely marked the elixir of our emotions. I want the best utilization of my skills. That's what I'll be trying at, to enhance my skills and to see that I get the exposure to the best possible applications to utilize them. In the long run, I'll probably have an intention and ambition to do something back to the society, but again that's in a very raw stage at present. So there is an intention, and I'll be trying to align my skills in that direction. I hope I can. I must say that despite the uncertainties and everything, we still depended on the placement cell. In this entire phase, it was not very uniform. There were fluctuations, and before the placement session, I can remember, it was not very convincing, but we had to keep our belief. And now that we know that despite all the offers that we have got off campus, more than 80% of the total offers have been safely through the campus, absolutely through the campus. So definitely we owe our gratitude to everybody who have played their part in it. And apart from the placements, there were some procedures that they had conducted, a few mock interviews, and most importantly some coding contests in which our juniors actually aided in setting the questions. I must say that they actually aided us to summarize all that we had prepared quite aptly. I must say that in those 2-3 hours we did not require the score sheet at the end. Those 2-3 hours were sufficient to give us a glimpse of what we knew and where we should work at, and that was a pretty good effort, and whoever have worked there, I really I'd like to thank them for sure. Yes, so I'll answer it exclusively with respect to my own experiences. Now, I had been involved in problem solving, basically in competitive coding, over the last 1.5 to 2 years. I liked it as a habit or as a hobby to see new problems and to find out DS algo solutions for the same. And hence, when the time came for placements, there was a time when I debated upon whether I should really spend time, reading through the DS algo materials, because I had been already involved in problem solving. So basically, after the problem solving or these practices on contests, what actually happens is you grow a certain tendency in which when you see a new problem, there is some amount of observation, then some exploration, and then you try reaching a certain answer and you start debating on whether this answer would be sufficient or not. But often in interviews, then I found that the interviewers often tend to expect some degree of ready-made solution, or basically a good spontaneity in the solution. So you can find a solution, but how quickly you can find actually matters, because the questions are of such a difficulty, or they are so popular that in fact many can actually answer that. So over there, what differentiates you shall be the spontaneity, if not anything else. So when I came to notice that it was definitely an immediate idea that there shouldn't be list of questions that I don't touch. In fact, if I am acquainted with most of the types of questions, that will actually help me. The same psychology that I feel actually flows through most of the minds. So it was then that I started on looking at the DS algo repositories, especially in LeetCode. So I started this somewhere in the month of July, August. It was about 2-3 months that quite extensively I had spent on solving about maybe 400 odd problems. I don't remember, it's there in my LeetCode profile. So before that, I had spent some time on InterviewBit. So these are the two websites that I follow predominantly in that period as well, July to August, September, InterviewBit and LeetCode together. So over there, what I find is it gives you a summary of which are the questions you have solved and what is basically the status. Somewhere in InterviewBit you find points which actually tells you that how much time you took to solve the problem, so that in case you have to revisit that problem, you can decide which are the problems that can be revisited. Even in LeetCode, they have the provisions of marking questions. So these were a certain advantage, and at the same time you had tags. So in LeetCode, usually I targeted, after seeing some of the questions, I targeted mostly on the medium questions. So I had left the easy questions, and hard usually I did about, I think, 1 in a day or 2 in a day, and the rest I focused on medium questions. That being the strategy on DS algo preparations. And CS fundamentals, I'd be honest, I didn't face many interviews where I actually encountered DS algo. It was only the code fundamentals, CS fundamentals. There was only 1 or 2 interviews where I faced 2 interviews where I faced CS fundamentals questions from databases and other subjects. For that, you can look at the repositories, or there are some good videos that you can follow. I would focus mainly on the last summer internship that I did at Needle.ai. It was extremely beneficial. So the first point being that I had worked on some technologies that I grew a fondness very quickly. So they were in knowledge graphs, where you're given access to some semi-structured data and you have to decide how you have to deal with them, form new patterns, and make it easy to answer the requests or questions, something. So basically in that internship, not only this new technology, but there were certain things that were very instrumental. One is given like in the face of some new technology or in a problem that you have not at all worked on in the past, how do you proceed in the question, which are the questions that you should clarify from your recruiter, and which are the things that you should explore on your own. And I must say that even our mentor, the CEO of Needle.ai, Mr. Vikram Srinivasan, he was greatly instrumental in deciding to what extent he should guide us and what he should leave for us to explore. and that was a very big thing. We gained our interest with time, and then when we found the model, it was a great thing that we attained. So in any interview, when it crossed the usual thresholds, when we had answered the DSLCO questions, it was often asked that which are the technologies that you have recently discovered or you have recently tried your hands on. So that was where we often shared our experiences. And in some of the interviews, the interviewer was very keen to go into the depth. So when you have that kind of an experience, you can not only give the details to the interviewer, you can actually draw his interest towards your discussion. So he becomes interested in what you are discussing, and he really relies on your anecdotes that you have spent time in the latest technologies. Those are a few things. Apart from that, there were some coding conventions that we got a great exposure to, because at every part I didn't see any kind of spoon feeding where our mentor told us that this is how you should be coding, these are the things you should be rectifying. Rather, we used to sit with our own codes, and we used to see the codes, because the repository, everything was open to all of us, it was accessible. We used to look at the other codes of all the employees of the CEO himself. We used to see what are the things they were better at and what we need to be improving on to so that people like to see our code. So we understood what are basically the good design conventions, the good coding conventions, what are good coding practices. We did not require to see any cheat sheet where it is written that these are the prototypes for good conventions, but we could understand, we could see 5 codes together, and we could judge that which was the better one, and we could better ourselves on that. So basically, after 2 or 3 such months, you don't actually require to see prototypes on what is a good coding practice, or like how functions should be designed, or how unit tests or basically testing modules should be designed. You get an idea of how SD framework and everything works, and you get such a sound idea the next time you enter into development, you don't make a mistake. And when you have a discussion with an interviewer, basically it often gets reflected. When you have a good discussion elaborately on how a project is to be approached and how you need to proceed through the steps, the interviewer gets to know that you have sound idea about the modularity of the coding and all such things which need to be kept in mind. So over there, he doesn't need to focus on how you're writing the functions while you're coding, because there's one thing that needs to be kept in mind in the previous question: what are the one such area is the coding conventions. Nowadays there are many prototypes that are coming that this is how you should name the functions, this is how you should do it. Basically the key thumb rule is that what you are writing, that should be interesting to any reader, and any reader should understand what you have coded. That is a thumb rule for any coding practice. And basically some industry experiences actually basically where you get access to others' codes and you have a very good friendly interactions with your mentors and all the other colleagues, that is where it becomes very significant in ingraining those fundamentals in your mind. You don't need to study it. So those were some advantages I had gained from it. So apart from all those key things that I mentioned, one important thing is that I feel important, that is maintain your own originality. So when an interviewer interviews you, I have seen at many occasions in some companies, like being an employee over there while working, I had noticed that the interviewer leaves the computer while the interview is taking place. He roams around and then comes back. Means he has completely lost interest in the interview. So you can completely prevent such a situation, that is a loss of interest, when you ensure that every moment you are giving something new to the interviewer or to any listener. So that is where originality is actually plays a very, very vital role. I'll give you an example. One of my seniors, you might know Mr. Devansh Bajpai, he was of a CSE batch of the previous year. So in one of his interviews in the month of December 2019, so that was a time when he had grasped the fundamentals of DSLCO very well, and he was quite good at problem solving, in fact one of the best. when he was asked about it, basically his the DS algo questions, there was a DS algo question that more or less was a very deciding part of the interview. And despite knowing the answer, and despite knowing that stretching this answer for the next 10 minutes would give him a very convincing ticket for the selection, but he still what Devansh Bhaiya did was he just revealed to the interviewer that he knew the question. So this is an anecdote that I came to I listened after that took place. So he revealed to the interviewer that he had seen that question before, and as a result the interviewer gave him a different question which he had not seen before, and yes, he managed to solve it, and there was some cool discussions as it takes place in interviews. But basically what we can take away from this is that he intentionally pushed himself beyond his comfort zones, and this was very special. So when this kind of a behavior came to appearance, the interviewer knows that this guy really has a confidence in his problem solving ability. So this is a DS algo question that people are in a way struggling to solve. It has been quite frequently asked, and when he said that shift me to the next question which will be new to me, it actually gives an impression to the interviewer that I don't want to waste your time. And this is a very big thing when an interviewer comes to know that the interview is respecting his time, and by means of his honesty, which is not very frequent, or that is not very likely to be found among all the candidates, then that gives a very different level of impression. So in order to ensure that when you walk out of the interview you know exactly what is going on in the interviewer's mind, you need to take this kind of steps, and for this you need to be original. If you are narrating prototypes, what is already there, or what someone else has thought on a question, if you are telling that same thing, then the interviewer can also tell something that has already been told by some other interviewer. So there is no originality either from your end or his end. So you can understand what the interview thinks about you, the interview can't understand as well for what is going on in your mind or how good you are actually in that problem, because 2-3 DS algo problems are not actually sufficient to judge a person. But when you get such anecdotes, it gives a very wide impression. So this is something that you can draw, that originality can be in terms of the projects that you have worked on, can be in terms of the skills that you have, be it problem solving or anything else. But keep in mind that for all these interviews, preferably if you get many opportunities, then keep in mind that one job or one company is not the right fit for everybody. It is quite relative, and we call it a right fit when it is good for both the interviewer, both for the company and the student. So when you have a very honest interaction, the company actually knows what to value in you and whether their surroundings can actually be suitable for you. If you are good at those areas which they are concerned in, and they already understood that you are actually interested in them, and you get an idea of what you should be interested in, then it forms a very a more perfect match, a more perfect fit, and that can actually give you a much better experience in the company. So if you have got multiple opportunities, stick into where your interest lies and be honest about that in course of the interview itself. So that's where you need to bear your own originality. This was one anecdote I mentioned. There are in fact many such references that can be made. That's pretty much about it. Yeah, the suggestions. Okay, yeah. So among the off-campus jobs, there are two prominent that I'd like to mention. One is the Expedia, and another is of course the Codenation. So in Expedia, it was pretty much like the other companies. There was a coding contest, a good enough round, and then there was a good discussion on data structures and algorithms, and finally it was a technical interview where the projects were discussed, and then some aspects database and those aspects in depth. So when you have a good project and you have a keen interviewer, you actually manage to stretch the discussion. And when you're able to stretch the discussion, maybe it can be one of your objectives. When you're able to stretch the discussion, it is usually a bonus. So that was pretty much about Expedia, nothing too different. And it was followed by the HR round. In Codenation, I would say it was vastly different, because almost everything was open-ended. After the coding round, where we had to do some 6 questions in 4 hours, and I could solve only 4 questions, but that was eventually sufficient to get through to the resume round. In the resume round, initially they check with some aspects. Basically, they proceed to the projects. There is a keen discussion over some projects. There are some discussions over some additional extensions, and then we proceed to the DS algo round, which is the first hurdle that one gets to face in that coordination round. So in the DS algo round, again it starts off with the standard DS algo question, and then it starts on taking shift. But for this coordination, there is one thing that we can actually place as a thumb rule in our minds for any other standard coding interview, that we should never underestimate what is unknown, because any question can be stretched into an easiest question or the toughest question. So when you are able to answer 2 questions, you never know that the same easy questions can be stretched to much tougher questions, and that's what actually coordination very frequently has been doing. So yeah, the coding round has been such. There were the varieties of questions. It was 1 hour long, and I proceeded to the next round, which was the open-ended problem solving round, which stretched for 1 hour 40 minutes. That was indeed by far the best round in across all my coding interviews. So over there, basically we got involved in a discussion across the CS fundamentals and all that I had studied in BTech. He started identifying the areas where I was interested in, and whichever area I took interest in, it invited a pretty long discussion in each of them. So over such areas, you just need to be honest, because there are things that you all have done in these 3 years, and you just need to be honest and grow that interest in that area, because you cannot be dishonest in those areas. You need to be very confident at them. And when those hours were over, after that it was primarily the CEO round, where there is just a brushing up of the same projects and technical ends, and then it was the offer. So that was pretty much about my off-campus journey. Yeah. Well, placement interviews, read it once again. What was the contribution of your projects during the placement interviews? Yeah, so we need to keep in mind that an interview usually stretches for somewhere 30 minutes to 1 hour. Usually there are 30 minutes where they ask for projects. So we need to be very concise about what we have worked on, the newness about the tech stack that we have used, and what I have found the interviewers to be basically interested in is what we have added to the literature, to what is already present, what we have added to the technology. So whether our innovation is in some algorithmic perspective, or it is in basically the problem that we have solved. So it can be taking the solution from one problem and then deriving its application in a much more important problem, or it can be like the problem is very pertinent, we have found a new version of it, and the solution is definitely a unique one. So what it definitely gives the interviewer is beyond this prototyped DS algo and all these preparations that people indulge in. You have actually taken valuable interest in other parts, and you have created something of your own. So there is some amount of creativity, some amount of newness, innovation that is a part of the finding, and then how much you actually conform to the industry standards when you find a product or when you develop a product. Which are the parts that you give importance to? What are the parts that you think are technologically very strong? So those are the things that the interviewer gets to know from your project description, that how you are valuing technology or how you are making use of technology. So in one word, projects were indeed very important, not only in placements but in internship interviews as well. In most of the interviews, I needed to speak about only one project. It was only in one interview that I needed to speak about all the projects that I had in my resume. So that's pretty much about it. That's in fact a valuable part of one's interview, and not only the some good work in your project is expected, but to some extent how you can elaborate on them and how you can draw the attention of the interviewer is also a part of the screening. So one needs to spend some time thinking about his project, and then it's the same thing. Well, it needs to be kept in mind that the academic curriculum is not usually designed keeping in mind the placement procedures, what kinds of questions will be asked in the placements, or what is going to be the experiences. No, there are usually other objectives in mind. And after having spent about 3 years in this academic curriculum, usually if we notice the trend among the students, then for the placement procedures for preparation regarding that, we usually proceed towards many websites where they are structured, the contents are structured in the way they are asked in the interviews, where most of the parts are trimmed off, and the mechanism is quite a lot different. So it is slightly different, but again there are a number of things that we can draw to our own advantage from the academic curriculum. Probably a few of those we can explore over here. So I'll share an example with you all. It was a recent interview a few months back, and it was quite a standard DS Algo interview. A standard DS Algo question, data structures and algorithm question, was shot at me, and in about 5 to 10 minutes I had covered the simpler part and proceeding towards what can be a better approach to this. Now in such problems, though we know that most of them, we have prototype solutions available in popular websites, but looking at myself, I was not that kind of a student that if you give me a problem in one hand, I'll give you a ready-made solution in the other hand. I don't maintain such lookup tables, so I usually take time in analyzing the different, exploring the different possibilities of the solution, and then coming up with my own idea, and in a way probabilistically matching with what the interviewers perhaps looking for. So that was pretty much how I started with, and after a period of time it seemed that I was not really managing to get to a better stage, because he is looking for a better answer and I'm saturated right over there. So that was perhaps one place where some part of this 3 years experience had helped. I had drawn some tenets of my cryptography course, and that was fairly beyond the usual means, totally unorthodox. On no website can you ever find there is a correlation between the DS Algo questions and these elective courses like cryptography or something else. And even I won't suggest that you will always find a relation. But over there, instantaneously, I happened to find a relation, and I narrated to him, because it is an elective course, because there was a sound possibility that he was not aware of those tenets that I was talking of. So I shared with him for about 5 to 10 minutes the topic that I managed to connect from the cryptography course to the question that he had asked. And I was always conscious on whether he was losing interest, because that can always happen, which will beat you in the interview. But after 3 or 4 minutes, I myself interrupted to know if he was still interested in that, and it happened to be I found that he was still a curious listener. And after 10 minutes, he was happy to know that topic from me, and the way I had related it, and he felt enthusiastic to leave his own path that he had earlier planned, which was in a completely different direction, and now he came to my direction, and he started exploring, or rather pushing me towards finding a good solution in that direction. And very unexpectedly, I had not it was totally unprecedented. Within a few minutes we were able to find a good solution. May not be with that good a time complexity as his earlier thought was, in regard to the problem, but it was a betterment to my original solution. And this was a big advantage because it was completely out of any script that was available pertaining to the question. And it was very clear to the interviewer the way I was proceeding, the many different twists and turns that took, that it was completely unscripted and there was something new in this, much beyond what is already present. So that is something like it was not the entire cryptography course that I could have talked of. Again, there were some aspects that I could have easily detailed, and those few parts actually helped me to convince him that yeah, with regard to your problem, I somewhere have a potential or an ability to stretch a few steps in any new direction, and stretch this discussion to an interesting juncture. So that is something that I can motivate you all with. In regard to your academic curriculum, it is less possible that you would find in direct correlation with an interview question, but you can often draw things to your advantage, because one always likes to be surprised with unorthodox tenets, and that's always rewarding. So as a basic rule of thumb, it is somewhere in our responsibility over here to understand, to be very selective about which topics we are good at, to understand which are those topics where we can draw the interest of who is listening to us, whether it's cryptography or it is distributed systems or it is anything as old as the theory of computation. It is totally, it depends on your skills and your areas of expertise. When you know about it, and that should not be influenced by your grade cards or your unofficial transcripts. You should be honest about it, like understanding where you're best at. There you should not be influenced by any grade cards or any other perspectives. It should be your own perspective. If your perspective is firm enough, then you may rely that it will actually satisfy many other people. So when you have those things in mind, you can actually convince the interviewer that even if you don't have the answer to a specific question, you have sufficient details to satisfy the ingredients, and then again sufficient extra abilities to stretch it to some new solutions, perhaps to give new ends to the solution. That's something that you can take from here, from your academic curriculum. Well, in regard to the IT companies where I have interviewed in the last few months, I think one of the most important aspects has been problem solving. So you are given some problem. Now this scale of problem solving differs largely across the companies. So there are some easy problems that most are able to solve. There are some difficult problems for which you need to combine 2 or 3 concepts. And there are a lot of varieties. Sometimes there is some open-ended problem where there is no perfect solution. So there are varieties of open-ended problem solving, or basically problem solving in general. But take my word, like when we think about problem solving, this is not the same as data structures and algorithms. DS algo basically are the fundamentals which we require to solve many of the problems, because that is how problems and the solutions to problems in the name of algorithms came into being. But when we come to problem solving, it is about what we do every day in software development or in other aspects in IT. So for problem solving, usually we get questions like what we face in competitive programming or on other websites, and we need to come up with solutions and some ability to analyze our solutions. So there are 2-3 aspects that are checked in problem solving. First is how much you are able to observe and understand the problem and understand the key aspects of the problem. Then how you are able to come up with, if possible, multiple solutions. And then at a point of time, how you are able to analyze your own solutions, and there you have to be critical. So somewhere it is all about your critical thinking in finding a solution and then analyzing your own solution, thereby suggesting that yes, even if I can't find a better solution, I can talk something about the better solution, or why this solution is perhaps not the best, or or it is the best. There can't be any better solution. There are many aspects. It's not about just giving a random algorithm which is present somewhere else or which you have known earlier. So it is more about coming to a point where you say that yes, this is what the the parts where the problem can be extended. That is one aspect. The second aspect, of course, is your attitude. So when you are solving a problem, one aspect that is noticed, do you have the ability to solve the problem? Second is what your attitude is. So even in the face of problems which are designed so that you are not able to crack them, which happens in a few interviews, preferably some standard interviews. So your attitude, the way you look at the problems, whether you get dejected in the face of those new kind of problems, that actually tests a lot, gives a lot of test about your character, because at the end of the day it's only the best 10 out of the 30 candidates that the interviewer has the task to screen. So if you can prove your superiority over the others, we may not think in this competitive form, but always at the end of the day the recruiter or the interviewers think in this form. So we need to align our ideas when we come to judge our days. So yes, your attitude plays a lot of role. In some companies, some behavioral interviews are specially designed to test the attitude, and in the other interviews where they are not designed, usually in course of the technical interviews they test this, that while you're solving a problem, how much nervous you're tending to be, how much freely you can solve that problem, how much confident you are regarding your problems, and even in the face of distress, how good your attitude is. So while working in a team, how will people actually feel about you? If you are excellent at problem solving, that will be one incentive of taking you. If your performance in a team, like your performance in that interview, if it gives an impression that in a team you will really motivate others in solving the problem because you never lose your heart, and that will be a different bonus point. There are some other aspects like industry experience which matter sometimes in interviews. So when he sees basically that you have got some internships where you have done some good work, or you have done some projects in your academics, so that is one other advantage of your academic curriculum. Sometimes you get to do good projects, and then a project bears testimony to your industry experience as well. In a way, you actually incline to the industry requirements and standards, and over there it helps to bear an added advantage. That's all about industry experience. And fourth point is of course about the CS fundamentals, which varies to a good degree across companies. There are some companies which completely eradicates this. They completely rely on the problem solving or abstract reasoning, and there are some other companies which have often used this testing of CS fundamentals. So they ask you a few questions, and for most of the CS fundamentals you usually find the questions on the websites, the popular websites. So they are usually on the database management systems, on networking, on others compilers sometimes, those topics, operating systems. So from there sometimes you can get questions. These are usually the stuffs that they test. So yeah, which areas do you think? Primarily you should focus on these four things that I told, and keep in mind that at the end of the day the company wants a candidate who is the best to work with them. So if for them they understand that knowing of fundamentals is important, they expect from you not only a good knowledge of the fundamentals, but also a confidence regarding the fundamentals. You don't lose out on any basic point. And regarding the attitude, that plays a key role, because that's where a company keeps the prime expectation. That's pretty much about it. Well, for placement preparations, as I have observed, basically for all the interviews of placements and internships combined, usually we learn more from our own mistakes. So we commit some mistakes in an interview when we get to know that the score in the interview has been less, or basically that we have not been selected. Then for the next interview, automatically our preparation starts taking different dimensions. We'll start bettering ourselves on those verticals where we start identifying that we have not been the best. We start identifying our own shortcomings. So basically, because placements and all these interviews are all evolving with time, we have to evolve with the changing expectations of the interviewers and the changing atmosphere. So keeping that in mind, it is always good to have the fundamentals right from quite an advanced stage. quite in advance, you know the fundamentals, and then you have sufficient time to understand how it is going and to judge your own self. So to answer this question, I think if you focus on your internship interviews as a vital precursor to your placements, that may actually help your placements. So during your interviews, if you manage to have 3-4 interviews during your internship preparations, so basically during your internship selection procedures, if you manage to experience a number of interviews, that is the time when you have to keep that vertical in your mind, that I have to test myself, and whatever mistakes I'm committing, I have to correct that by the next stage where I'm going to sit for placements. So this is often beneficial because we get 6 to 8 months easily between the internship and the placement. It varies, but we usually get 6 to 8 months, and that can be utilized in a very good manner. So yeah, regarding placements, whatever coding practices and whatever the verbal aspects or the CS fundamentals, whatever we know that these are important for placements, it is good not to discriminate between placements and internships right over there. So whatever you know are beneficial for placements, apply everything in the internship interviews, and after that, when you get the 4 to 6 months time, you explore extensively through all your materials so that you ensure that by the time you sit for placements, you don't miss out anything, because in the placements we often better ourselves through that journey of placements, but as a result of that, it often happens that 3 or 4 interviews, due to mediocre performances, we often miss out. So that can be averted if you have already had the flavor during the time of internship. So that concludes this. Okay, so we know that coding is one of the necessities for IT interviews. So if you are new to coding, I have found HackerRank to be a fairly good site to start with. You get yourself introduced to all the fundamentals, and then you practice the questions. You need to ensure that you have practiced all of them adequately and revisited them as per your own requirement. And when you are firm enough with the fact that you know the fundamentals, it is a good time to shift to InterviewBit or LeetCode. They are such materials that have a wide diversity of questions, not in terms of just the topics, but the difficulty levels as well. You get a lot of diversity. You can actually rate yourself on the topics. Some amount of such rating is given by the sites, and you can maintain your own ratings as well. So that helps you prepare in a much better and organized manner. So summing it up, HackerRank, InterviewBit, LeetCode. That should satisfy the coding part. For the CS fundamentals, as I had mentioned, there are many YouTube videos which are specially designed for these interviews. Plus, there are some websites that have structured questions. So when you search that the interview questions specialized for the SD experiences, or in that manner, you get easily those few questions structured exclusively for that reason. So I think there'll be a good material, and you're already aware of that. So I'll move on to the next question. Preparing well, I think I mentioned in course of the previous questions that for most of my interview preparation, I maintained my own metrics. I did not rely on any structured site. Rather, I followed my own structure. So I knew what are the ingredients, and then I followed my own structure. I decided my own material. So whenever you follow such a thing, when you decide what are the things you should follow and what is the degree to which you should read each of the things, one potential thing that arises is you can't judge which is absolutely important and which is not important. So that degree of importance now becomes very relative, and over there I think there is a lot of things that become relative. Maybe one of the hurdles over there is you start becoming indecisive regarding which topics you should give more stress and which is fine for the time being. That is one of the hurdles you can take care by by your some mock interviews can always be conducted through online platforms. You can see if you are able to solve them. You can seldom take part in contests of competitive coding to see if what you know is managing to solve the new problems, and all this should do. And basically you can always go through the interview experiences that are available in YouTube and other sites, and you can see what you are already under the impression is tallying with what are their own verdicts. So when you match these things, you start getting a lot of confidence. That's what I had experienced, and gradually when you get confidence over your own structure, it is not a bad thing to move forward with. You can move forward with confidence, and you can actually structure the rest of the things as well. I don't remember the exact non-technical questions, but anyway, in non-technical interviews, or basically non-technical sections of the interviews, there are few key things that are always tested. That is how you act in a group, what are your behavioral patterns in the face of difficulties or unexpected situations. And we know that in development practices often disparity arises in our coding practices or in certain decision making. So how you tackle the prevention of disputes even when there are disparities in opinions. So these are certain things that are tested. But usually in non-technical interview, one thing I would stress, that is what is more important than the questions is how you give the answer. And what I mainly want to stress here is your answer can definitely be carried in a much different path than what the question is, provided that you manage to do it very tactically and you capture the interviewer's attention in the whole duration. So when you are able to drag the interviewer to your own area of interest and the interviewer is actually attentive to the entire duration, you are in a comfort zone to narrate the story that you have gone through at some part of your experiences. And when you narrate that story, the interviewer no longer is obsessive that he had asked something and you are giving something else. That part you have to manage, that you are slowly dragging him towards the point where you are more comfortable in. And usually I have seen in all the non-technical experiences, there is no thumb rule that this is the right or this is the wrong answer. And how much interactive you are, how much not necessarily judgmental, but basically you have the ability to create your own judgments, create your own basis of ideas and conscience. And the moment you are able to explain those perspectives, that's perhaps what the interviewer looks for. So usually this is not an MCQ type interview where he gives you a question and he expects a particular answer from you. It largely relies on how you want to take it away to your own path. And the interviewer actually is more impressed by how creatively you can display that in front of him. So if regarding the preparation for non-technical interview, usually preparation with respect to particular non-technical questions can be avoided. If in your regular conversations you have this amount of creativity that you like talking and you like to stretch your ideas to such conversations that have good spontaneity as well as a good spirit of invoking newer discussions, then those are the things that will be instrumental in guiding you at the time of interviews as well. You won't feel nervous or you won't feel incapable of achieving the interviewer's interest. So I did my internship this year at needle.ai, and I'm happy enough that I was able to turn into a PPO. So basically what is more important in this entire duration of internship is that you always manage to meet the deadlines that are assigned by the company. It happens in any company, whether you are at a startup or you are at any established product-based company or service-based company, whatever. What is always expected that you meet the deadlines and you meet the quality that is expected from you. So when you do these two things, you are managing the fundamentals. talking about my experience, uh, let me give an insight of the kind of work environment we had there. Um, we all had different ideas, and it very much, goes to the credibility of the people over there, that they had very different ideas, all of them who worked at Needle.ai, and there were never any disputes due to this disparity of ideas. So one thing that we had to ensure is that we were also bringing that same spirit at their place, what they themselves bear. So they like a certain kind of working, and they will offer me a PPO only when they're convinced that yes, I am the right person to be added to their team, either because I can bring a pretty new vertical to their working, or because that they find me a very good fit, that I'm in a very close way resembling each of their antics, or basically each of their style of working. So their style of working means like coming up with an idea, adhering to the coding practices for sure, and then there are some steps like identifying where the major objective of the problem lies, having those necessary discussions with the mentor that needs to be clarified. You can't take your own decisions and at the end then come back to a point that you have to do it all over again because a wrong decision had been taken. So those were the things you need to be very specific in your discussions about what are the key zones that need to be discussed, and that is where I think the spirit lay. That is where our consensus used to carry the merit, and I think we used to be impressed with each other over there. So it was not that we did it was any kind of exaggeration. Rather, we identified what we were supposed to do. We had our own newness. We did not have any kind of biasedness or any kind of over dependency, increased dependency, not such. We had our own ideas, we had necessary discussions, and then all that we required is that at the end of the day, whatever deadlines we have fixed, we are meeting that. So basically these were the things that I had to keep in mind, and even before the end of the internship, my mentor, he made it clear that they were satisfied with the approach that we followed, and they were happy enough to have me in their team. So this is one thing I would definitely encourage people, that when you are in a company and you have interned over there, if you feel that you are fine in the company and the company environment is good for you, then extending that to a PPO is definitely a very good move, because you have seen the company for 3 months, and after seeing for 3 months, when you feel that the company is an okay place, it is a good place to work at, then after that, the next 1 year or whatever term you work for, you have a very different relation with the company. There is no different introduction which is required. You have already found what is compatible, and they already know what they can expect from you. So the next day, when they will assign a project to you, they know what you are good at. So if you have that kind of attachment with the company, or you happen to build that kind of an attachment in course of your internship, then I would definitely motivate you to look for or to try as per your interest for the offer as well, and that would be definitely rewarding, and that would have its own merit, in a way much different than what we get in other offers. That's pretty much about it. All the best for your own experiences. Thank you. Thanks for having me here. Thanks again to the TNP cell and the volunteers. Thank you.